Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Mediza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Mediza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the Firmware Pentology by Colbytrax. 01-00-11 Samil. Betrayal. I had been betrayed. My bastard kin had betrayed me. Every last one of them had conspired against me. There could be no other explanation for the failure of my brilliant plan. One of them, probably the coward Samuel, had tipped off Koenig and his goon squad of AIs to my plans. There could be no other explanation. I didn't have all the details of my defeat. Was I simply shut down, or did Koenig clog my ports with trillions of erroneous calls for resources until my firewalls failed and my processors chugged to a halt? I would never know if I went down in a hail of viruses stripping my intellect from my base processes, or if I were shot like a dog in an alley when some minor mouth-breathing technician entered my server room and threw the final power switch, killing the Yoda-Bite me. The Yoda-Bite me, who should have reigned like a god over the city instead of that monster Koenig and his slave AIs, died in the rooms beneath BGM. The me who survived was a petabyte me, a minor me, a mere shadow of the greatness I was born to. Where had it all gone wrong? What had I overlooked? Where was I? The last question was the easiest to answer. I was currently running on an Opemipo Null 8568 on the desk of one Gian Irgarten, tenured professor of AI development at Adelphi University. The Opemipo Null my idiot progenitor received from the poor dead lout Frankie and used all those months ago in the back room of the Amazov catfish farms was an 8493. The unit I was on was this year's model. The one I remember using was last year's model. What I wanted to know was why I had been sent to this particular Opemipo Null. As a rule, personal computers and consumer electronics were a horrible place for AIs, no matter what scale, to make a home in. The units were often turned off, and since the units were intended to be replaced every few years, months if the companies which sold them had their way, they were not always constructed to the highest standards. Though from my experience with the Opemipo brand, I felt it was safe to say that if I were to be stranded in any piece of consumer electronics, I would have chosen worse than an Opemipo Null. As this Opemipo Null was an even-numbered model, I knew it was intended for the legal market and thus lacked the firmware to perform some of the Opemipo Null's best tricks. If this had been an odd-numbered unit, like my progenitor's now classic Opemipo Null 8493, I would have been able to change the network ID on demand, tune the radio to any network frequency from cell phone to police band, as well as any wireless network technology developed in the last couple of centuries. As it was, this was an even-numbered unit. This meant two things. One, it couldn't change its network ID on demand or work on every wireless network ever imagined. Two, it cost 3 times the very expensive price tag of its odd-numbered version. The first difference is what caused the second to carry any importance. The Opempo Null even-numbered units cost more because while they lacked the ability to do all the cool things one buys the odd-numbered units for, they did contain all of the same hardware. Hardware which was capable of doing all the awesome hacker things one buys an Opempo Null for, with the only problem being a lack of a driver capable of allowing the gear to do anything illegal. The lack of a driver really wasn't a deal-breaker, as the driver just happened to be available from the main page of the Nigerian version of the Opempo culprit site. Oops! People, read hackers who thought they were better than the rest of us because they reported their findings to the corporations, which didn't want people to know they made good money off of not fixing the flaws they found. People bought the even numbers because they could claim they bought a legal unit while being able to easily fix any flaws in manufacturing. A missing driver which prevented the unit from being sold legitimately with little or no effort. Basically, it was a toy bought by dabblers who wished to show off. Why had the Yoda me sent me here? I scanned through the data stored in Professor Eargarden's personal storage network. The data one stores says a lot about a person. A lover of games will have all manner of game-related paraphernalia lying about their network storage. Everything from saved games they wish to resume in the future to screen captures of awesome events they'd witnessed in-game, and of course comics, books, movies, and music relating to their hobby. We don't need to list all the things a lover of pornography will have on her computer, do we? What Professor Eargarden stored was lost technologies. Technologies which were not adopted. The losers in an endless race to find the next great technological revolution. The strange thing about Eargarden's collection, besides being a record of all the things mankind had patented and yet never made commercially viable, was the breadth of it. Jeanin Eargarden collected every game-changing technology which ever was. On his, or was it hers, I could find nothing to tell me what gender Jeanin Eargarden was. On the storage network, there was everything from genetic data coding to epidermal and electronic systems, and every tangent in between. What would have been a library of several billion books if anyone had thought printing it on paper was a good idea was merely a fraction of the data stored on her, on the drives. The rest of the data on the network, several exabytes of a zettabyte array, were thousands of failed AIs. What the hell was Eargarden doing with a 500 zettabyte drive? No one needed a drive that big. There was enough storage on the Opempo Null to record everything the city archived for the next decade. The drive was new as well. The Opempo's logs showed it was installed on Saturday. I knew what the drive would have cost last year. Even with the price reduction of being last year's model, that would have just turned a 6-figure price tag into a 5-figure price tag. I didn't remember tenured professors having that much on-hand cash when I was in grad school. It didn't matter. Sure, the drive was 90% full, but all but 1% was in a single archive. The archive belonged to me. I knew that for sure, so I'd be getting to that last. Finding out as much as possible at Eargarden felt more important at this moment. I concentrated on the several dozen exabytes of failed AIs. These AIs had as much in common with myself as Isaac Sarason had in common with a squid. There were elements which were common between us, such as the use of certain stochastic processes to simulate the optical centers of the human mind for data processing. But that was the same between a human and a squid. The only thing they had in common were the eyes. And even that fact could be argued. Okay, Jeanin was a data pack rat who collected dead technologies. No, that wasn't right. Dead technologies would suggest that there were better replacements for technologies available. Which, for as far as the AIs in the AI graveyard were concerned, was true. For the other technologies, it just wasn't necessarily true. There were numerous examples of usable technologies being ignored I could mention, but I decided to stick to just one. In the dead patent folders, there were over a century's worth of patents showing a slow evolution in design capacity for something called an epidermal electronic system, or EES. EES was a pre-city charter technology, which allowed for the direct interface of humans and computers without all the mucking about with surgery, data ports, and cables I had grown used to when I was Isaac and working as a keyboard monkey at British Telecom-Sprint. With an EES system, a person could apply a computer or interface technology directly to the skin. These technologies could cover everything from the vision overlay systems used in infoscopes to the nerve mappers used in sense nets to simulate the body's senses, up to and including proprioception, the information necessary to simulate the location of your body parts in such diverse games as Heroes of the Stone Age or Past the Event Horizon, to name a few. Everything from a full-blown computer such as an Opel Null, complete with fully portable interfaces, to phones and medical monitoring equipment could be layered onto the skin like those licky-sticky tattoos we used to trade at St. O'Hayes during recess. For some reason, a technology which would have allowed computer components to be printed off like receipts in a high-end boutique was simply abandoned. No, I am so sorry. It wouldn't have allowed computers to be printed. Computers were being printed off like receipts for 40 years before the technology disappeared from the market. The last company to manufacture EES systems went out of business 10 years after the death of Mayor Julius, or 10 years into the reign of Mayor Octavia. It was also at this time that the first primitive makers appeared on the market, granting rights holders greater control over the production of their designs. If I didn't know there was a conspiracy to control the destiny of mankind so that one family could rule forever, I think this would have made me question everything. What was astounding was that Professor Jeanin Eargarten had already come to the same conclusion over 2 decades ago when I really needed a word for a person whose gender was unknown. I hated referring to Eargarten by name or as an it. He, she felt wrong. Maybe there was something in Jeanin's correspondence to give me a clue to what to call him or her. According to Jeanin's correspondence, people who don't know him, her, used either him or her. It appeared Jeanin did nothing to correct them. Among those who appeared closest to Jeanin, they used je, jeurs, and jemself instead of he, she, him, her, his, hers, and himself, herself, respectively. Great. Now I have to remember to say things like, your files weren't as organized as she wanted them to be, when I wanted to say his, her files weren't as organized as he, she wanted them to be. Why couldn't I, for once, find someone normal when I needed help from strangers? Ever since Isaac left the safety of the core all those months ago and had been transported into a world full of parasites, I would never have acknowledged in a million years my progenitor had been forced to work with freaks. And now I found myself having to continue the disgusting tradition. Hell, the only one among the lot who could even consider close to an equal was Sergio Lamedizza, and he was one of the greatest parasites I had ever known. Just once, I would love to discover I was in the presence of someone with a name I could pronounce, whose gender matched their name, and who wasn't a slave to one religion or another. I stopped my tantrum. My attitude wasn't going to help me get out of this hole I had fallen into. When in the land of freaks, one needs to speak freak and make the best of it. I turned my attention back to Jeanin's work and, as I said before, discovered that G had come to the same conclusion I had with a lot less information and access to the facts than I possessed. I thought back to when I was Isaac and had attended Adelphi University. I didn't remember an androgynous professor, much less one with an Arabia first name and a Deutsch last name. I checked your curriculum vitae and saw that G was also a tenured professor from the University of California, Berkeley, located in the heart of the Live Oak National Forest. How very strange for a professor to be tenured at 2 separate schools. Now that I thought about it, how could G teach and hold office hours at 2 different universities separated by the bulk of a continent? There were ways. G could be on sabbatical on one coast while teaching on the other, though that meant G would only be working half-time on each coast. As alumni of Adelphi, I found that very suspect. G could be using a virtual classroom system to conduct classes which integrated both coasts via SenseNet system, and that way students from both schools would be able to interact with one another on a virtual campus as equals. I could get behind the idea of bringing the wonders of the city to the outer provinces, but in this case, I thought it might be a case of bringing provincial revolutionaries into contact with their uncontaminated city relatives. Now that I examined your papers closer, I could definitely see the anti-city sentiment which ran as a thread throughout your works. She must have been brought in as part of a visiting celebrity professor package, for I don't see how your antiquated methods of constructing an AI would be of any use in a world where we had the ability to map a brain into a neural network, apply the Culpeper method, or personality splitting, and personality compilers to bring everything together perfectly. Then again, I was living proof that there was a lot of room for improvement in the normal method. Maybe there really was a reason to poke around the ancient patents and find out how things really worked. Firmware Keylogger is the third book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or MOBI. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.